head coverings. But back then, this is the only place in the Torah that mentions it, and we have no reason to believe that anyone else was doing it. And if you ever look at like old pictures of Moses or something, you never see a yarmulke on, probably because his horns got in the way, so he couldn't. Yeah. Right, that was last week. We talked about that. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. Let's keep going. Oh yeah, sorry. Please use the mic. Or not.
That came from rabbinical times in Europe.
Well, way before Europe, more in Babylonia and in Israel, but way later than Torah times. So, okay. Edith?
He led forward the bull of purgation offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the bull of purgation offering, and it was slaughtered. Moses took the blood and with his finger put some on each of the horns of the altar, purifying the altar. Then he poured out the blood at the base of the altar. Thus he consecrated it in order to make expiation upon it. Moses then took all the fat that was about the entrails and the protuberance of the liver and the 2 kidneys and their fat, and turned them into smoke on the altar. The rest of the bull, its hide, its flesh, and its dung, he put to the fire outside the camp, as Adonai had commanded Moses. Then he brought forward the ram of the burnt offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the ram's head, and it was slaughtered. Moses dashed the blood against all sides of the altar. The ram was cut up into sections, and Moses turned the head, the sections, and the suet into smoke on the altar. Moses washed the entrails and the legs with water and turned all of the ram into smoke. That was a burnt offering for a pleasing odor, an offering by fire to Adonai, as Adonai had commanded Moses.
Okay. What verse did you get to? I lost.
We're up to 22.
22. Okay, yeah, 23 is where I really wanted to go. Okay. Well, one more?
He brought forward the second ram and the ram of ordination. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the ram's head, and it was slaughtered. Moses took some of its blood and put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses then brought forward the sons of Aaron and put some of the blood on the ridges of their right ears, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. And the rest of the blood Moses dashed against every side of the altar. He took the fat.
Okay, so that's good till there. All right. Now, yeah, I told you. I don't know how many of you are excited to get into this. But there's something fascinating that's going on here that I never would have picked up on unless I learned this from a rabbi named Ari Kahn, who I frequently quote, who I think is one of the top teachers going. What happens after Aaron? What happens after Aaron? Right away after Aaron is ordained, what happens right after that? His sons. Okay. Now we know that there's 3 types of Jews. When you have your seders and you put your matzah out, you put out three matzahs. The top one representing the Kohen, the middle one representing the Levites, and the bottom one representing the Israelites. The middle one, the Levites one, you break and hide a piece for the afikomen for later on. All right, clear so far? So why is it, now the Kohens we know, they're the ones who do service. The Levites originally were not supposed to be part of this. It was supposed to be the Kohens, and the Levites are awarded to be their helpers. But the original helpers were supposed to be the firstborn of each tribe. But because every tribe, with the exception of Levi, participated in the 2 sins, the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, and the Chet HaMaraglim, the sin of the spies, they lost that position, and the Levites, who didn't participate in those 2 sins, are elevated. And so instead of having the Kohens, the firstborns, and the Israelites, we have the Kohens, the Levites, and the Israelites. Clear so far? To be a Kohen, you have to be from what tribe? Levi. But just because you're a Levite doesn't mean you're a Kohen. Okay. Now, to be a Kohen, you have to be from the tribe of Levi. Why? Because Aaron was from Levi. And Moses was from Levi. By the way, the reason, I don't know how great they were, but the reason that the Levites weren't involved in the sins is because they stuck with Moses. They said, you know what, we don't think he's dead. Because he's from our tribe, we need him. He's our guy. Doesn't matter if he's been indicted or whatever, he's our guy. All right. All right. That's a BB joke. That has nothing to do with this country. I don't comment on politics in this country. That's a BB joke. All right. All right. Two greatest countries in the world. All right. Okay. So, how do you become a Kohen? You have to be from the direct line of Aaron. But you have to maintain it. So what does that mean? If you're a Kohen, you're Aaron or Aaron's sons. So then Aaron's grandsons and his great-grandsons and his great-grandsons, and you have to be directly from that line. Now, what happens to a woman who's from a different tribe who marries a Kohen? She becomes a Kohen. The status of this goes by the father. Why? Because Aaron was a man. The status of whether you're Jewish or not goes by the mother. Why? It's because the mothers raised the kids. Because the dads were studying or farming, and the women did all of the work instilling the values into the children. What were the men really doing? Drinking coffee and playing backgammon. What were the women really doing? Actually raising the kids. And so you get your values and your morals from your mother. Now, I'm not saying that's how it is anymore, but that's how it was 3,500 years ago. Although there's probably still a fair bit of truth to it in some respects. But that's how the law came about. But you go by your Kohanic status. So how can a Kohen son not be a Kohen or not be fit to be a Kohen? A Kohen has to marry the right people. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a widow. A Kohen is not allowed to marry someone who came from any kind of illegitimate marriage or a divorcee, whatever, right? So if they do, then their kids become Kohens, but they're called chalalim, which means they're not fit for service, and the line there runs out. Now, Moses, right away, after, if you were bestowing on your brother, Moses had a pretty good leadership role. He was in charge. And now he's bestowing basically second in command on his brother. How do you think Moses was feeling? I mean, how do you think he was feeling about giving this honor to his brother? Pride, right? Yeah. It's like when Obama put the Medal of Honor on Biden. You know, it's a proud moment. Why would he be jealous? He's already the president. He's not jealous. It's a wonderful thing. So he has this great pride, and then he gets to do it for his sons. And to do it for his sons is also really exciting. Now, it's his own nephews. Right. So, there's a problem. There's a problem here. By the way, why did Aaron merit to be the high priest? We might actually have a problem with him because of the golden calf and his role in the golden calf. We explain that away so that it's not a problem, midrashically. But I just want to show you a couple of midrashim from the midrash on the book of Leviticus. So if you look on the sheet, and then we're going to get to the problem. There's a problem here, but we haven't pointed it out yet. But before we get to the problem, let's try to figure out, well, what did Aaron do that was so great that he actually gets to be the high priest? So if you look on the top of the sheet, Ken, would you mind reading Rabbi Tanchum?
Rabbi
If you could use the mic, just in case they get the thing working.
Rabbi Tanhum taught in the name of Rabbi Yudan. All the 7 days of consecration, Moshe ministered in the office of high priest, but the Shekhinah did not take up its abode through his ministration. But when Aaron put on the high priest's robes and ministered, the Shekhinah took its abode through his ministrations. As it is said, for today the Lord appears to you, in Vayikra 9:4, and the glory of God appeared unto all the people. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces.
Okay. So the only thing I just want to point out here is, for a brief moment, Moses was the high priest. Because in order to bestow the high priest on someone else, you have to be the high priest. So they needed someone to do that. So Moses served for a brief moment as the high priest, but then he gave it to Aaron. Okay, now, what's so interesting about Aaron? Let's look at the next midrash here. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman.
Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said, all the 7 days of the burning bush, the Holy One, blessed be he, was trying to persuade Moshe to go on his mission to Egypt. This is indicated by what is written, also from yesterday, also from the day before, also since you have spoken to your servant, Shmot 4:10, which makes 6 days. And on the 7th day he said to him, send, I pray thee, by the hand of whomever you will send, Shmot 4:13. Said the Holy One, blessed be he, to Moshe, as you live, I shall tie this in thy skirts. When did he repay him? Rabbi Berachia gave answers in the name of Rabbi Levi and Rabbi Chelvo, and Rabbi Levi said, the first 7 days of Adar, Moshe was offering prayer and supplication that he might enter the land of Israel. And on the 7th, he said to him, you shall not go over this Jordan. Rabbi Helbo said, all the 7 days of consecration, Moshe ministered in the office of Kohen Gadol, and he imagined it was his. On the 7th day, he said to him, it belongs not to you, but to your brother Aaron. This is indicated by what is written, and it came to pass on the 8th day that Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said unto Aaron.
Okay, so now I learned this from Rabbi Ari Khan. I want to pass it on to you, what he was teaching here. This midrash is fascinating because it points out one thing: Moses' hesitation. It took God 7 days, when Moses was up at the burning bush, to convince him to take the job to be the one to free the Jews. We all know the story, right? Moses said, it's not for me, I don't speak well, I'm not good in social situations, who am I? The people aren't going to believe me, on and on and on and on. And actually, Ken brought up an interesting point before we started, which is, why is the 8th day so interesting? Why was it on the 8th day, after 7 days of sacrifices, that the priests are initiated on day 8, right? And we're going to have the next Torah portion is called Shmini. Shmini means 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8, Shmini, 8th, right? So why is 8 an interesting day? Because sometimes things take a week. A week in the Torah is like a special idea because you cover the whole cycle of creation, or one whole unit. And so if you wait one whole unit, if you wait one whole week, and a week is 7 days, then the day after that is always going to be the 8th day. If you can do that kind of math in your head, you understand now why 8 is like an interesting day. So we have a few different things that take 7 days. And then something happens on the 8th day. The first thing that happened was God tried to convince Moses for 7 days to take the job. On the 8th day, he went out and started with the job. Okay. God didn't appreciate that. So what this midrash is saying is, Moses, you hesitated. And because you hesitated, someone else said, I'm ready to go right now, whatever you need me to do. Who's that? Aaron. And Aaron, right away, when he was first asked, will you be Moses' partner? I know Moses doesn't speak well. Will you be his spokesman? Instead of saying, hey, I'm the older brother, well, I should be in charge, he said, no problem. Whatever you need me to do, let's go. And that's what happens. Aaron's in Egypt at the time. Aaron comes back. God tells Moses in the Torah, Aaron's on his way back to meet you. He's ready to go. He's ready to be your assistant. Because of that scene, in that moment, when Moses hesitated and Aaron didn't, Aaron is elevated to eventually one day become the high priest. Now, the rabbis here have a difference of opinion because there were 2 7-day waits. One was 7 days to inaugurate Aaron, which shows that Moses hesitated, so Aaron, but the other one was for 7 days Moses pleaded to get into the land of Israel, and God also there told him, because you hesitated to lead my people, you're not going to have the honor of leading them into the land of Israel. It's an idea. There are other reasons that are put forward. I'm more interested here in the notion that Moses hesitated. Now, does anyone know what the Masoretic text is? Has anyone ever heard of the Masoretic text? What is it? Anyone know?
The one made in the vernacular?
Sort of, yes. So, yeah, Alfred. It has vowels. But it also separates the words into words. And it separates the Torah into chapters. And it adds punctuation. Has verses, has has verses, has periods, what we call sof pasuk. But it also has, in addition to vowels, cantillation, how to sing it. You know the trope marks? This happened right after, this started to be written by a group of people known as the Masoretes, who, Masorah means the tradition. They were the people who carried the tradition. Masorti, traditional, is what conservative Jews call themselves in Hebrew. They're Masorti. Brilliant word that they took before we could grab it. Traditional in Hebrew, although they're not fooling so many people in Israel. Don't worry, the wrath for them burns as it does for us. Yeah, Richard?
Quick aside, if you Google Sassoon Codex, it's on display right now at Anu Museum in Israel.
Yeah.
It's coming up for sale, but it's a
30 to 50 million bucks. It's, yeah, 30 to 50 million.
But you can Google it right now, and there's a wonderful display of photographs.
Yeah.
Where you could see the cantillation marks, and you can see all of these things that we're talking about. And as best I can glean, it's the first known complete copy
Yeah.
of the Torah in that Masoretic
Right.
form of presentation.
And they value it, very good, I'm glad you said that. They value it at about $50 million. And we had a choice about 7 years ago. We were either going to do these buildings or get that book. And I voted for the book, but we got the buildings. So they're about those 2 buildings, which will educate thousands of people and bring Judaism to our entire community, or that book that nobody would look at. So would have been cool. I voted for the book, but we got 2 billion. Okay. But I would tell you, though, with construction costs during COVID, that these 2 buildings are worth a little bit more now than that book. So we got that going for us. So you can walk into any museum and say, yeah, but we have. Okay.
They could charge the people for coming to look at the book and use the money to build the building.
Where were you on the steering committee when we had the, would have been a lot easier. Yeah.
There's supposed to be 3 such texts, and that's just one of them.
What do you mean?
Looked like around 800-900 Common Era. That's when it was written.
Oh, yeah, correct.
And there's 3 different of the same complete texts. Well, this is the most.
Oh, okay. Well, no. So the Masoretes, there was one version. But I'll explain what I mean by that. Because there were previous versions before that. How do we know that? Because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So let's just get into this for 1 second. So the Talmud is finished roughly around 500. After the Talmud's finished, the Masoretes go to work, and they start to, the Torah was basically just one word. That's how it was given. And if you go and look at the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel, I'm sure some of you have seen it, it's all like one word, those texts. Because at that point in history, at the time that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, they hadn't broken up the words. I mean, if you know Hebrew, you can tell where the words are supposed to be broken up, but they're not broken up, and there's no punctuation. And there's certainly no cantillation. So, when the Masoretes put in the cantillation, and sometimes in the Torah there are little dots above words, or letters are written small, for different reasons. Scribes know how to do this stuff. And each one of those teaches an idea about the Torah. So there is a tradition that everyone knows about the Torah, that this means this, and so we write this letter small. Okay. And that we break up the cantillation in this way because everyone knows that for the last 3,000 years, this is how we sing it, and the reason we sing it is because of whatever. And so the cantillation in and of itself, how we sing it, is a commentary. Now, there's one cantillation marker called the shalshelet. The shalshelet. It's only 4 times in the whole Torah. And one of them is here. So if you look at verse 23, the first word is vayishchat, which means and he slaughtered it, or he slaughtered it. If you do you have the cantillation marks in the plow? If you look over the chet, the 4th letter, even if you don't know any Hebrew, but the 4th letter, you see that squiggly thing? There's only 4 of them in the whole Torah. Every other trope mark, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. This one, there's only 4. And it's, I don't really even know how to sing it, but it goes, anybody know? How's it go? Yeah. It goes on and on and on. It's called the shalshelet. Now, I want to show you one other spot where we see it. Now, to be fair, there are 3 other spots where we see it, and 2 of them don't really teach us much. But one other one does. If you look at Genesis 19:16, we also see it. You see on the sheet, Genesis 19:16? It says, "But he lingered, and the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters. God's mercy was upon him, and they brought him forth and set him outside the city." This is Lot. What? Right. Like in Ani Ma'amin. Right? He lingered. It's over the word he lingered. Now, remember I told you, the issue with Moses was that when he was offered the job to be the head of the Jews, he hesitated. And because of that, he's not going to be the high priest. Aaron's going to be the high priest. And the shalshelet comes right as Aaron's about to become the high priest. Why? To teach us that Moses hesitated, and for that reason, Aaron's going to become the high priest. Because you might ask there, why would Aaron be the high priest? Shouldn't Moses be the high priest? He's a Levite. He's Moses.
Well, there's politics and religion.
Okay. So, yeah. But if you look now at that shalshelet that happens to be there, and then you look at other places in the Torah where it is, you see that shalshelet is there whenever the Torah is trying to tell us to pay attention to the hesitation. Clear so far? Interesting, right? Okay. Now, that's the Israeli one. Yeah, right. Very good. Very good. All right. Now, you might say, is Moses hesitating because he doesn't want to give up power? Now, that doesn't really jive with the Moses we know. Moses didn't even want power in the first place. Do you remember the story of Eldad and Medad? These two guys are prophesying in the camp in the book of Numbers, and people come to Moses and say, these two guys are prophesying and talking to God. They're taking your job. And what does Moses say? If you look at the next source, Numbers 11:29. And Moshe said to him, to the guy who came and said, can you believe what they're doing over there, acting like prophets? He said, are you jealous for my sake? If only all God's people were prophets, and then God would endow them with his spirit. I wish I didn't have to be the only prophet. You think I like this? You know how annoying you people are? Right. Let everyone be a prophet. I wish everyone had the pure of soul and intellect that I wouldn't have to do it for all of you. I don't need that power. Let everyone do it. So to think that Moses is hesitating on his own accord, that he wants the power, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, the only compliment the Torah gives Moses is that Moshe anav me'od. Moshe was very humble. That's who Moshe was. So to think now that he's jealous of his brother, that makes no sense. So what's the hesitation? That's the issue. Clear so far? Okay. Now, could Moses, in fact, have been the high priest? According to King David, who's like a good source, you know, if you had to say, well, who's your quote? You know, is it a real scholar? Well, how about King David? He was a prophet. He wrote a pretty good book called Psalms. So look what King David says. Psalm 99:6. Moshe and Aaron were among his Kohanim. And Shmuel was among, okay, whatever. But King David tells you, Moshe was fit to be a priest. That's King David. King David was a prophet. So he could have been the high priest. And now he's giving it to Aaron. But there's a problem. And the problem is that he hesitates. If there's one thing we know about Moses, he can hesitate. We've seen him do that before, especially for 7 days at the burning bush.
Could it be that he had a vision of Aaron's sons being burned and dying just before he turned?
Nadav and Avihu?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, maybe. I didn't think about that. Very good idea. I have a different idea, but that's really interesting. I didn't think about that.
Also, he's been doing this function for the Israelites for so long,
Yeah.
and he knows the stresses, you know, what it takes, where some of the pitfalls are, where he went wrong. And so you might hesitate because it's really difficult to put somebody else who you love and who you admire and who you respect in a really difficult position.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Very nice. Other ideas? No? Okay. So in Exodus, when Moses is thinking about it, and Aaron is ready to go, how do we know that? So if you look on the back of the sheet, somebody have would you mind reading the Rashi on Exodus 4:14, Roberta?
And the Lord's wrath glowed. Rabbi Joshua, the son of Korah, said, wherever the term "and God's wrath glowed" occurs in the scriptures, it leaves a definite impression, mention of punishment of some kind follows. But here, no such result is mentioned, for we do not find that any punishment came upon Moses in consequence of that anger of God.
Right. Now, why was God angry? Because Moses was saying things like, how do I know the people will believe me? You know, and he was basically putting down the people of Israel. And it was almost like he was gossiping about them. And his punishment the punishment for gossip is leprosy. Or, well, not leprosy, but sara'at. And he put his hand to his bosom and he took it out and it was scaly. And God gave him a taste of, don't speak about other people like that. And God's getting really mad at him for not wanting to take the job. Okay, this is Rabbi Yossi. Around here we call him Rabbi Jose, but it's really Rabbi Yossi. Okay. Yeah, please.
Okay, and Rabbi Yossi said to him, as a matter of fact, here, too, some definite result is mentioned. Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? which implies that he was destined to be a Levite, an attendant on the priests, and not a priest.
Right, so in other words, Aaron was never meant to be the high priest. But because you're hesitating now, I'm elevating Aaron. Okay?
And I intended that the priesthood should proceed from you. Now, however, this shall not be so, but he will be the priest, and you the Levite, as it is said, 1 Chronicles 23:14. But as for Moses, the man of God, his sons are named among the tribe of Levi.
Okay, so in that moment, when Moses hesitated, this is Rashi's opinion, although he's taking it from the Talmud. Aaron leapfrogged him with regard to the role of the high priest. Now, there's another problem. Well, there's two other problems. I'm not ready to give it away yet, though. Let's look at just the rest of that Rashi. And when he seeth thee. When he seeth means when he sees you. That's what seeth thee means.
And when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart, not as you believe, that he will be angry with you because you have attained a high position. In consequence of this, Aaron was privileged to wear the ornament of the breastplate, which was placed over his heart.
Okay. And you see all the sources there. So, by the way, Rashi is a cut and paste work. Rashi only 4 times in the whole Torah tells you this is what I think. Every other comment is cut and pasted from the Midrash or the Talmud. Now, what's the big deal? What's so great about Rashi? Well, first of all, he saves you from having to go and look all through the Talmud and the Midrash to find it. But also, if you look at the Midrash, there's usually 6 or 7 opinions. He picks one, the one he thinks is right. But that's why Rashi, when you read it, should not be, your answer to what the Torah means. It should be the beginning of the conversation of what the Torah means. The Rebbe of Lubavitch, when he would give sermons or discussions, they would basically be commentaries on Rashi. He'd say, okay, here's what Rashi says. Here's why he says that. Right? This is just the beginning of the conversation. So, if you really wanted to get into it, you'd look at the text that Rashi picks, and then you'd go and say, well, what are the ones that he didn't pick? The other ideas that the other rabbis said, why didn't he pick those? And okay, and then you can go to Nachmanides, and I'll tell you why Rashi's wrong. Right. Then you can come here, and I'll tell you what it all means. All right. All right. There's 2 problems. First problem, I don't think is as big a problem as the second problem, and I also don't think it's as fascinating, but it's still nevertheless interesting. Moses, well, it's kind of going to give it away. But this is, if I was going to tell you, if you just read this Torah portion, you just came in here and read it and said, all right, let's talk about what's here, it would be kind of boring. Because we talk about, all right, so the high priests are going to be Aaron and his sons are going to be the priests. Isn't that wonderful? The separation of powers. You can give a whole sermon on how great separation of powers is, and that Moses is going to handle the religious stuff and the judging of the people, and Aaron will be in charge of the slicing and dicing and everything that's going on with the animals and the offerings and so forth. And fine, okay, isn't that great? So wonderful. Later on, you'll have to deal with Korach, who says, how come your brother gets the best job? I'm a Levite too. Why can't I be the high priest? And the answer is because you didn't step up. Right, at 60, we had a better coalition. Okay. His coalition was more radical than your. Okay. Okay. So that we could talk about that. Or we could talk about the protuberances of the liver and how exciting it is to throw the blood on at the 4 corners of each of the base of the altar, and that's fine. But if we look deeper, and we recognize that there's a shalshelet here, and Moses had some sort of hesitation, and we then go back and look and say sometimes Moses hesitates at really important times, and when he does hesitate, usually his brother Aaron's there to lift him up and help him go through. And isn't this wonderful now that his helper Aaron is going to be there? We start to see that there's an interesting dynamic between Moses and Aaron, and that this section of the Torah is actually a bit of a commentary on the relationship of Moses and Aaron and the differences between them. And there's one very major difference. All right, you with me so far? Moses married a woman who converted to Judaism. What does that mean? It means his children are not fit to be priests. They can't be priests. A Kohen, a high priest, who marries a convert to Judaism, it's a legal marriage. There's no problem with the marriage. It just makes you ineligible to be the high priest. You can still be a priest, but you can't be the high priest. Right, yeah.
So, when did that rule come into play? Because Moses is now at a point in time where
Okay.
he's got this hesitation, now he's anointing his brother.
Right.
But did he know that
So-
was he married?
So it's a really good question. Because before the Torah was written, there are no rules about anything. Once the Torah is written, it's going to be added to with other laws to protect it by the Talmud. However, the mitzvahs, this is how traditional Judaism looks at it. You don't have to buy this, but it's what the Torah thinks. Traditional Judaism looks at it in a way to say that the mitzvahs are baked into the creation of the world, just like the rules of science are. So gravity, we didn't know about it until someone dropped an apple, right? But it existed. Electricity existed, it just wasn't discovered. Then it was discovered, and we say, okay, now we know it and we know how to use it. But it was always there, we just didn't know about it. It's the same thing with the rules of the Torah. They're baked into the science of the world before they were written down in the Torah. And one of those ideas that God used to create the world was that it is impossible for someone who's not considered completely pure. Now, what completely pure means is different maybe today than what we thought about it back then. But the idea of being completely pure as a priest means that you need to marry someone who's born Jewish, which I don't care because I married a convert too, but I'm not a Levite or a Kohen, so I wouldn't have been eligible anyway. And I said that to my wife. I said, I'm marrying you. Had I been a Kohen, I don't know. And she's been living with that sense of humor for 25 years. Okay. So Moses doesn't care. Moses doesn't care that he's marrying a convert, Zipporah, who converted. She converted at Mount Sinai, so it was legit. The rabbi who did her conversion was God at Mount Sinai. So, you can accept her documentation. If she ever wants to move to the state of Israel, they'll say, not good enough. But, but Moses doesn't care if he could be the high priest or not. He's not interested in that. He doesn't care about leadership. He didn't even want to have the job that he does have, which is better than the high priest. But what does he care about? So, if you look, how do we know the rule? If you look at Maimonides, he sums it up for us. Similarly, this is Rambam, the laws of Isserei Bia. Isserei Bia means the laws of forbidden relationships. Similarly, a female convert or a freed maidservant, even if she was converted or freed when she was less than 3 years old, since she is not a native-born Jewess, she is deemed a zona and she's forbidden to marry a priest. Now, a zona usually means a prostitute. That's not what we're saying here. It just means that she's unfit to marry a priest, which isn't so bad. She's still accepted into Judaism. I couldn't be a priest either. That's just how it is. I'm not from the line of Aaron. So some people can't be certain things. It's fine. It means you're meant to do something else. It's not a problem. But for this particular case of the Torah, what it meant was Moses couldn't be the high priest. Now, what I'm telling you is he doesn't care. He doesn't care. But after he ordains Aaron, then he ordains Aaron's sons. And then it occurs to him, there's no place for my sons. And we never hear about his sons, really. So look at one more midrash from Sifrei Dvarim. Rabbi Natan says, Moses was saddened that one of his sons did not stand in his place. Whereupon the Lord said to him, are the sons of your brother Aaron not like your sons? Which means to say, the point that the midrash is making there is that Aaron's sons learned Torah from Moses. And anyone who you learn Torah from, it's like they're your parent. I'm not making I'm not paying for any of your kids to go to college or anything, or vice versa. But that's what it's like saying, Moses, why would you care? Aaron's sons are like your sons. They learned everything they know from you. But Moses was in fact saddened, and he did hesitate. And when he looked at Aaron, he said, this is the dynamic that's going on in this week's Torah portion. He looked at Aaron and said, I'm really happy for you. But then it occurred to him, wow, your sons are going to get to do something that my sons aren't going to do. And that saddened him. Now, I will say this. Moses' sons just meld into the pact. They never cause any trouble. They never do anything wrong. They never become sinners. Usually that's what happens. When Ishmael said, I don't want to be a Jew, he becomes an idol worshiper. When Esau said, this isn't for me, he becomes evil. Usually, when you don't hear from them, the sons, it doesn't go well. Moses' sons were humble, were kind, caused no problems. And later on in the book of Chronicles, we see some good things about them, that many generations came from them. And that they carried on the tradition of the Jewish people. But to a certain extent, Moses, I think this is the case for all of us who have kids. For a certain extent, you want them to do what you do. You want them to care about the things that you care for. So, my dad is the first one in the history of our family not to be a rabbi on that side, ever. But he became a doctor, which was the only other acceptable choice. So I started it up again. But my brother did something that the family can never forgive him. He became a lawyer. And this is just right. So, no, just kidding. I know you're all lawyers. So you have to ask yourself, do you really care? And I think Moses, for a tinge, he hesitated, but then he did it. I think for a tinge he said, boy, it would have been nice to have my kids in the family business. But then God said to him, what are you worried about? You got what? And then what did Moses realize? I don't care, actually, if my kids do what I do. What I care about is they carry on the values of who I am. And what do we learn about Gershom and Eliezer, Moses' two sons? They never became high priests or leaders. What did they become? Humble. They became humble. Moses was known as being very humble. And so the idea is, it doesn't matter if your kids do what you do. It matters that they carry on the values that you instilled in them. And hopefully, like Moses, if you instill humility, then they pass it on. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.